All right, everyone. Thanks so much for showing up today. And I'm just going to tell you that this is recorded. So if you do not want to be recorded in any way, shape, or form, now is your time to exit and leave. But hello, my name is Alexander Dunlap. I am here, I'm one of the organizers for the EXALT Dialogues, and you're here at the first EXALT Dialogues of 2024. And today we have Elsa, who has organized an amazing event today about extractivisms and neoliberal urbanism. And today I'm excited to do that. And I'm just going to give a brief couple words just to talk about the EXALT initiative, which was began in 2019, and it's extractivisms and alternatives to it. And there's a series of symposiums, sometimes conferences. And right now there's the EXALT Dialogues is really just a way to try to have conversations about things that interest us that are related to extractivism or alternatives to that, or alternatives to extractivism, to just delve into this. This is mostly a do-it-yourself, kind of all volunteer run for the most part initiative, just to kind of have these conversations. And this is a great project that I believe in. It's out of the University of Helsinki. Happy to introduce it. But so getting into today, I'm going to hand this over to Elsa, but just today the theme is extractivism and ultimately the urban environment. And this is obviously very important for the reason that for most of us are often living in cities, or we're in weird universities and offices, and all of these kind of material infrastructure came from somewhere. It just didn't come out of nowhere. And often, like everything, it comes from the earth. And so this really stresses the importance for us to kind of critically reflect and to look at our urban environments and to really think about actually how things that we take for granted and that are very normal to us, from roads to buildings to piped water to a series of different infrastructures, or the quote hard infrastructures, and how these have actually serious ecological and social costs. But so with that, I'll hand this over to Elsa, who will say a little bit about themselves and kind of prepare us for getting into this today. So again, thanks everyone. Thanks all the volunteers at EXALT and everyone being here.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Elsa. I'm behind this event because I've been following EXALT for probably I've watched most of the things they have put up on their YouTube channel, and I'm very interested in the themes. And I thought, as EXALT is researching political, ecological, and political economic aspects of extractivism and alternatives to it, especially in the global south, but also elsewhere, I thought it would be equally appropriate to look at more kind of urban and global north environments and the other side of the supply chain, and also question the logic of time, because urbanization is not a natural phenomenon just happening because of like some laws of physics. It's the result of plundering of the countryside and the environments, and of course resources, livelihoods, and it often forces people to uproot, and it involves many different phenomena, and it's a political process and a site of contestation. And I've talked to many people in various different areas, completely separated communities, and not even communities, individuals who are very interested in this phenomenon of centralizing of power and decision-making and economic power, and how the neoliberalization of economics makes peripheries and rural areas suffer somehow. And then it's very, very dangerous to treat it as a quote-unquote natural phenomenon, and especially because often the alternative to that is kind of taken up by fascist powers and fascist scaremongering. And I've also noticed this trend of like looking up to urban areas and urban people as somehow like more intelligent, more capable, whereas people in the rural areas are often deemed as not as skilled, less cultured, and being like somehow behind the time. And this linear conception of time and progress and development should be contested. So I think this could be a series of events, but now we focus on three speakers who are going to talk about basically how this phenomenon of urbanization and status quo economic norms are impacting the states where people live, and not the states as in countries, but the kind of locations, and what the relationship between material flows look like. So I think we can start with the first speaker being Ville Kellokumpu. Do you want to introduce yourself, or should I do it?
Well, I will introduce myself during the presentation, so maybe that's I can do that. So let me share the screen first, and I hope you are then able to see the presentation. So yes, I will adjust a little bit here. Yeah, so thank you first of all for the invitation for this event, and my name is Ville Kellokumpu, and today I'm going to maybe a little bit talk about this kind of urbanism, or the urban as kind of a vicious abstraction, and let's go into that a little bit deeper here. But let's get the introduction out of the way. Of course, I'm a postdoc currently at the University of Oulu, kind of political geography and regional policy and regional development are kind of the fields that I would consider working in. So these kind of issues of urbanism and urbanization and kind of rural urban relations are kind of one of the core things and themes of my work. And well, in general, I've been kind of interested in political theory and political economy, and on also this kind of uneven development in general. Last May, I defended my thesis, which was on the topic of depoliticization, and this kind of depoliticization in the context of this urbanizing Finland and this kind of developing state-spatial relations, so to say. So in that thesis, I kind of looked at depoliticization in the context of visionary planning and urban politics, but also from this viewpoint of the bioeconomy and forest industry also, which are kind of very, very integral parts of the kind of regional economies here in Finland, in rural places. Of course, these kind of state capital relations between the forest industry and the state also. Well, I've been also working with my colleague Janne Säynekangas on this kind of extractive practices of the Finnish forest industry, and writing a little bit about this kind of pulp capitalism or pulpwood capitalism, kuitupuukapitalism, and trying to kind of outline these extractive kind of practices of the Finnish forest industry through this concept. Well, and some kind of future endeavors coming up this year. I also got funded by Nestling Foundation, and the topic on that project will be the class politics of climate change, and then kind of the role of labor unions in this sustainability transformation. But this kind of background information out of the way, then we can maybe go into this presentation a little bit more, and kind of, instead of running through these various research themes that I have, I would like to maybe present kind of an argument in this presentation and try to kind of outline this argument a little bit. A relatively simple argument, I would hope so, but let's get into it. And it kind of focuses on this way that we often tend to view these rural urban relations. So how this kind of view might hinder our ability to see these kind of various material and extractive relations that kind of constitute the urban, so to say. So if I would somehow kind of condense this argument, I would maybe put it this way: that in a capitalist society, urban space comes to be viewed as kind of abstracted space, and the ways that we think about the urban can kind of constitute a vicious abstraction, so to say. So what do I kind of then mean with this? Let's try to dig deeper a little bit. So we are kind of living in the age of the urban or urbanization, so to say, and we have manifold kind of popular imaginaries, various popular imaginaries that seek to kind of promote urban areas, spaces, and places as these kind of prime movers of society and economy. And the kind of problem with these popular imaginaries is that they often deal with urban space as kind of abstracted space in a way, that is a kind of a space that is severed from its material relationship to other spaces, and as kind of space that appears somehow self-contained and then capable of kind of self-reproduction. So often these ways of thinking about the urban kind of constitute this kind of vicious abstraction that can start to hinder our ability to analyze kind of spatial relations and development in a holistic way, or this is what I would argue maybe. So maybe it's good to a little bit kind of open up also this concept of abstraction, maybe what I'm trying to go for with this. So what do I kind of mean by vicious abstraction? I think we can start with two definitions and maybe start with something general here. So abstraction can be viewed as this kind of, as it says here, as kind of a process or result of generalization, removal of properties or distancing of ideas from objects. So that is abstraction. Then we can take also another concept that is quite closely related to abstraction, which is reification. So reification is basically the kind of, put in a simple way, the treatment of something abstract as kind of a material or concrete thing, or a fallacy of misplaced concreteness also. So abstraction maybe as a thing on its own it's kind of a natural mental process of categorizing and simplifying things in order to kind of function in this complex world that we have. So probably abstraction in itself is not necessarily a problem. But when we kind of combine this abstraction and reification, I would say that this kind of constitutes a kind of a vicious abstraction. So then I would say that vicious abstraction is then a process through which this kind of mental models or ideas or generalizations are kind of treated as if they were a concrete thing that exists in the world, so to say. And these kind of abstractions, these kind of reified abstraction, we take this kind of simplification or a model or an idea, it's a simplification of the world, and then we take it up and then we go back to the world and kind of act as if that abstraction was a thing that actually exists in a world. These kind of things or these kind of abstractions can become in a way causally real also, that people start to act as if these abstractions were real. So kind of maybe like a prime example, this would be the economy, if we think about it as this kind of like a totality, so to say. Of course, the economy does not exist in the real world. It's a kind of a collection of various actors and transactions and different kind of accounting measures from which this economy, the economy is kind of abstracted and then it's treated as kind of a thing, which is kind of part and parcel of this reification. But of course, there are actors in the world, different groups, individuals or institutions that kind of respond, and then they adjust kind of their actions and according to these kind of various ideas, or like this respond, or rather, or relate themselves to this abstraction, and they, through this kind of, through reproducing this action, they kind of make it also causally effective, so to say. So what I would kind of argue with this comparison also is also that our thinking about the urban also can become distorted in ways that we treat kind of urban space as a thing separate from its relations to other spaces. We kind of reify it in a way. Our thinking about the urban can become like a vicious abstraction, so to say. So maybe this kind of a little bit about this background of like talking about this abstraction, this kind of analogy between the economy and the urban is probably not a coincidence here. And I would say that there's maybe something unique about kind of capitalism and capitalist society that makes these abstractions kind of socially and politically powerful. And maybe some listeners might have already teased a little bit about this background from my presentation, that it comes from this discussion about real abstraction in Marxian political economy and value theory. Also, so from this, especially from Alfred Sonrethel's idea about kind of exchange value becoming an abstraction that starts to kind of cover capitalist society. So to kind of, well, it's a good quote by an Italian philosopher, Enzo Pasi, which says that the fundamental character of capitalism is revealed in the tendency to make abstract categories live as though they were concrete. So I would say that this is maybe something that is somehow maybe unique or exacerbated in a capitalist society. So if we kind of move then a little bit more towards this discussion, towards the kind of ways of thinking about the urban, I guess the central question here then is whether these kind of forms of thinking about the urban, do they kind of constitute then, is it like a benevolent abstraction that kind of helps us to focus on a specific scale or area, and it kind of doesn't hinder our ability to see these larger changes or these spatial relations between the rural and the urban? Is it kind of a benevolent abstraction, or does it become this kind of a malevolent abstraction that kind of reifies the urban as this kind of self-contained space somehow, and starts to hinder our ability to see these different kind of connections to other non-urban spaces? Well, I guess I would argue that the scale often starts to kind of tip over to vicious abstraction, that we kind of treat the urban in a vacuum, divorced from these various concrete material transfers of natural resources and commodities between the rural and the urban, and kind of economies, forestry, mining, agriculture, refining, etc., and kind of these transfers of economic value and different kind of capital flows, and also these kind of political relations between the urban and the rural. So how could we maybe start to then move away a little bit from this thinking? Well, maybe a focus on this kind of material things is a good way to kind of keep in mind this kind of what I would call here a kind of holistic political economy of space. It could have many other concepts, but that kind of came to mind when I was thinking about this. But kind of the focus on trying to keep in mind these kind of various flows of matter and resources, that this transfer of matter and resources between different spaces and areas and regions, and these kind of different flows of capital and economic value, and these kind of various infrastructures and formations of fixed capital also. These are probably some of the things that we can keep in mind to kind of move away from thinking about the urban as this kind of abstract space, as I would say. And these various kind of flows always kind of produce this functional totality in which the urban is only one part of. So to kind of conclude here this presentation and this kind of argument, I would say that, of course, to kind of tackle the extractivism head on, it requires more than just like the ideological critique or shift in the ways of thinking, of course. So what we need, of course, is the transformation of these material practices on the ground and in the everyday. So what I would say here, that my argument about avoiding this kind of vicious abstractions, so to say, is kind of one small or tiny part in a way, but a part that might nevertheless be something that is necessary to kind of do along these transformations in material practices. So to kind of to maybe foster these alternative and transformative practices in urban planning, we also kind of need to think about what the urban in that urban planning designates, and try to kind of tease out how does the urban relate to the non-urban, so to say. So we should maybe try to always set the urban in this kind of, like a dialectical connection and tension also with its kind of counterpart, the rural or the periphery and the non-urban spaces. And that's maybe also something to kind of try to a little bit move away from this kind of thinking that might tip over into an abstraction. So I guess that is my presentation and kind of argument that I tried to kind of outline in this presentation, and I hope you got something out of it, and maybe it kind of outlines also the following presentations that come after me. But I think I will thank you with this time, and we can move on probably.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think it was a good first presentation, because I think the second one by Emil Tuupainen will be a nice follow-up for this one. And for those who joined later, we have the questions at the very end when everyone has presented, so there's more time for discussion. And the speakers can also engage between themselves. So if you have any questions, just write them somewhere, and then at the end you can write them in the chat, and we'll have a Q&A. We have a good time for the Q&A at the end. But yeah, now Emil, you can go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I will just share my screen. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, good. Okay. So I'm Emil Tuupainen, and I'm an architect, and also a doctoral student at Tampere University at the moment. And I will talk to you about post-growth planning and extractivism in architecture and rural-urban metabolism. So my approach to architecture and planning is somewhat more theoretical than practical, which is maybe a bit unusual for an architect, or I'm in between somewhere over there. In my research, I'm really interested in the context and surroundings of planning as action and the way the planner's societal role has changed and how the Finnish planning system affects the ability to further ecological reconstruction. I represent one of the younger generations of architects whose working lives are quite dominated by the ethical dilemma related to the high impact of planning. The construction sector is one of the highest polluters and resource users, as we might know. And according to Environmental Ministry of Finland, about 50% of the world's natural resources and 40% of unprocessed energy is used in buildings and construction. And on the global scale, the construction sector produces about 35% of the greenhouse gas emissions and 30% of waste. These are probably well-known facts. So ecologically oriented architects have usually an okay understanding of the material and practical side of more ecological construction. And some ecological orientations in planning and design are, for example, in the build scale, vernacular architecture, which is in this context means sustainable practices learned from traditional construction methods, and repair and restoration design, which is one of the most ecological fields of planning because it promotes preserving and caring. And in both building and urban design scale, there is also circular design ideology, and in urban planning scale, for example, public and low emission transport oriented urban design, and also a bit complex or controversial density ideology. These are just to mention a few. However, many of the ecological design orientations are good in principle, but often end up contributing to greenwashing if economic growth imperative is not questioned. So, for example, promoting material or emission efficiency can lead to more production emissions and resource use, and thus is more extractive. And this is especially true when talking only about more sustainable materials like wood construction, since most of the emissions in buildings' life cycle come from the construction phase, which means that regardless of materials, new construction is always more emission intensive than maintaining and reusing existing building stock. And especially new innovations of wood construction might not be long-lasting enough compared to the demanded growth period of a tree for structural use. And because of the tendency of greenwashing of construction industry, some Finnish researchers of spatial planning, for example, Jonne Hytönen, are calling for quantifiable demands of strong sustainability in zoning to control the private sector's growth-seeking tendency. I've personally been trying to learn ways to prevent greenwashing in planning in private, public, and the third sector, and this has led me to ecological economics. And for example, lately I've been learning about financial extractivism and its important role in greenwashing as the root cause of growth imperative in businesses and other organizations. And financial extractivism is also mostly my view of extractivism today, since I see it as the most tricky factor in the construction industry and also in the urban and regional planning. My interest in post-growth planning and rural urban metabolism has increased my knowledge on what kind of obstacles there are for making architecture less extractive and what kind of economic understanding should the planner or designer have. I have just started my PhD process around these themes. I just got funded last November, and I will be concentrating on economic norms in eco-social spatial change. And this might sound cryptic, but my current working title is Nature Restoration as an example of post-growth planning. This might be more descriptive, but today I won't talk about nature restoration, but post-growth planning and its obstacles. Most of my views that I present today are based on my master's thesis, Approaching Change in Rural Urban Metabolism, but I also present some current thoughts and interests. My master's thesis represents a research-based planning method, so it is more widespread and creative than research usually is or can be, which also allowed for creative ideas to come up, like formation of a parallel institution in the field of planning. One of the central viewpoints of my master's thesis was that institutional and societal norms seem to be one of the major obstacles for ecological reconstruction in the field of planning. I also made a notion that the role of a planner, especially urban or regional planner, would be quite different in post-growth society, of course, especially if equality and equity are considered important. So this difference in economic ideologies also affects organizational approach and suitable business models for construction and design. I used ecological reconstruction vision of Finland from BIOS research unit as a planning goal in my master's thesis. And I also concentrated on a shrinking rural area in northern Karelia, which highlights the obstacles of the vision. The vision compares the needed change to the post-World War II reconstruction era, and it also promotes a shift away from the growth imperative towards an economy defined by social and ecological resources and transition strategies. Growth-oriented planning approaches have been shaped by urbanization and other historical phenomena, and growth is usually seen as a precondition for spatial planning, even in non-growing areas. The earliest versions of the Finnish zoning system were created to functionally prevent urban sprawl. The current three-level zoning system was established 1958 for rationalist development and urbanization of Finnish society. The rationalist and hierarchical system was created to deliver the ideology of the Nordic social democratic welfare state in the 1960s and 70s, and strong centralized political control was thus embedded into the law. In recent decades, neoliberal economic policies have been the mainstream political economy ideology, which in short advocates for deregulation, free global markets, austerity policies of public expenditure, and the privatization of public capital. And the decentralization of the planning system started simultaneously with the neoliberal turn in policies. The most important change was in 1993, when municipalities were made responsible for their expenses and income. After this, the land use planning power shifted to the municipality councils, which were also handed over the ratification right for the detailed plans and later on master plans in the year 2000. The shift of the ratification power enhanced the benefits of the private sector and stakeholders, since the state funding decreased during and after the 90s, which has created a dependence on the market-led approaches in urban planning. Since the municipalities have to ensure their income to fulfill their constitutional responsibilities, population and economic growth is usually requested in regional and municipal land use strategies. Master and detailed plans might be used to lure investors and ensure growth, and they are not usually used that well to promote societally beneficial development. In shrinking regions like Northern Karelia, this often leads to regional concentration, which causes uneven spatial development in both services, but also in transportation. For example, the urban planning policies of Joensuu have been strongly criticized because growth-oriented policies override other municipalities' survival in the region. And lately, the social and health services have been detached from the municipal responsibility to its own regional system. This has again changed the situation in regional development, but it also might have increased possibilities to centralize important services even further, which could cause more spatial inequality. As we know, in the future, the need for more local food and goods production will increase because the climate change creates uncertainty in production chains. And increase in local production requires a change in metabolism and thinking between urban and rural areas, which growth-oriented planning fails to address properly. Paradoxically, rural areas are also facing increasing pressure for nature restoration, while municipalities rarely have clearly articulated planning tools or political programs that would support ecological transition in shrinking or non-growing areas. So, in my opinion, without change in economic policies, the growth dependence in strategies prevent any profound change towards less extraction of material and social resources. On the other hand, urban planning and zoning have tools for influencing land use if strategies and norms would be supportive. Post-growth thinking has increased in Finnish economic theory and discussion, but not yet strongly in the planning and design educational practice. And planning shrinking regions is theoretically more new in Finnish context, but already researched and probably practiced sometimes too. Planning shrinking areas is usually a reaction to losing in competition in the neoliberal regional development. So it is different theoretically than planning according to post-growth economy. The aim is to control harmful effects of centralization and privatization, like loss of services or accessibility, or overall loss of felt security due to vacant buildings. However, shrinking regions and post-growth ideologies have an important connection point, which is that growth-oriented planning approaches are not able to protect from harmful effects. Low growth and shrinking regions are vulnerable for global value extraction from land use trends that carry on high promises but end up benefiting only few or none locally. For example, interesting ones might be hydrogen production or some mining cases. And of course, wind energy in Sami area also, which connects the issues also to colonization. If municipalities are dependent on market-led land use planning but not succeeding in competition, there can be a high motivation to accept any private land use development scheme. This might increase the acceptance for intense forms of production that are ecologically damaging. When the services and population declines, it might be harder to find suitable workforce, which also might prevent more ecological primary production. However, economic growth is a normative feature in both institutions and society, and it is backed up by constitutional, collective, and operational norms. So post-growth planning ideology pushes the focus towards the understanding of post-growth organizations and institutional models and post-growth business thinking. In my master's thesis, I proposed the parallel institution tool and network for promoting change in institutional norms around planning. The working title for this approach was The Rogue Approach, describing its activist ideological foundation. Parallel institutions could be used to promote ecological reconstruction, especially in a context where growth is not happening. The tool is also suitable for growth context, for creating more deeply ecological development models. Social and environmental education could be implemented to the practice through themes that are important and relevant to local communities. It could also help designers and researchers understand local challenges. This approach could help prevent the mental health burden associated with the environmental crisis and even prevent polarization through collective activity in ideal case. The goal is to support and create local level actions that support a just ecological transition, for example, in production methods or culture. The parallel institution also has more flexible means of seeking funding for its actions, as its organizational form is not limited. For example, it could operate as a non-profit cooperative like the Snow Change Cooperative in Northern Karelia, which focuses on nature restoration. In an ideal situation, the parallel institution could replace livelihood that are lost in the ecological transition. Therefore, it could prevent unemployment and implement in practice the idea of a job guarantee of the ecological reconstruction vision. Without this feature, there is a risk for enabling only the well-informed and well-doing groups of the population. And maybe this risk, maybe this is the highest risk in this approach overall. The planner's role in this parallel institution approach is to understand how land use planning system works and to know which are the probable problems and bureaucracy with which non-professionals don't necessarily know of. The planner also provides regenerative concepts, ideas, and references to provide tools for locals to create shared visions before the actual institutional planning process can be approached. Parallel institutions could also be seen as promoting non-hierarchical planning logic against hierarchical approaches, which are connected to many problems regarding democracy, equality, and its tendencies to colonialism, which but right now I won't go into the themes. To continue from the idea of parallel institution in my master's thesis, I have continued on the question of how could planning create commons permanently? How could planning in any sector work as a counterforce to privatization? Or how to prevent financial extraction and pump capital from private to public or to commons? In situations where societal norms hinder the progress of ecological development, the parallel institutions could follow post-growth organization logic to function. So the financial extraction is behind the imperative of growth, but how to exclude financial extraction? According to Dr. Riebeck from the University of Amsterdam, post-growth organizations concentrate on transparency, sustainability, locality, and specific formations without venture capitalists or debt with interest. These special formations are for preventing the extraction, like non-profit co-ops or companies owned by foundations, etc. But how could financial extraction be eliminated from construction sector, which after all is really capital intensive industry? Like, I have no idea really. Like, these are just random thoughts that I put on the slides now. But we can approach this by examining one ideological proposal from the field of planning and design called a global moratorium on new construction, which is an initiative and a provocation that argues that a drastic change to construction protocols is necessary. The suspension of new building activity must be enforced. The initiative was started by Charlotte Malter-Barth, and it promotes architecture without extractivism. And the initiative leads to prioritizing repair and reuse planning and care of the existing built environment over building new. What would this mean in economic terms? Again, I'm not sure. I don't know. But what comes to my mind is, for example, maintenance backlog or repair debt in residential buildings, where repairs would require to loan so much money that lending the amount is not profitable for banks. This is one of the causes of unnecessary demolition of buildings and can be tragic for regular flat owners. The usual role of the planner in this situation is to either come up with ways to increase income, like adding apartments to the building block, or to design a bigger new building. Also, other factors might create obstacles like detailed and regional plans and politics aiming for growth in the area. Now, what if we would add post-growth business model in design firms that concentrate on repair and reuse planning? This is a really idealistic and naive example, but it's just interesting thought experiment that by preventing financial extractivism from the design companies, they could start using surplus to fund repair and reuse projects in situations where the maintenance backlog has gone over the acceptance of banks. So by turning into social enterprises. Of course, this would require ongoing revenues and fairly well organized and profitable business, which might take time to create. And of course, the hands of the owners would have to be tied long before the company grows to profitable. So this is just a recent idea inspired by the company and thoughts of Dr. Riebeck. If this would be added to the parallel institution idea, it is a way of creating commons in the field of planning and construction, but to absorb the required wealth from the private sector. Now, this order is really relevant and interesting because of the tendency of private sector overcoming publicly funded commons creation, especially in the art and design sector. And this is, of course, or this logic, of course, is in the core of post-growth organizations. So to summarize, non-extractive planning in the neoliberal context is, or at least I see it as creating and tending the commons. It could be done through parallel institutions or collectives for creating commons and pressure for changing institutionalized norms. Or it can be done also by choosing your client, working for activist groups, local communities. And post-growth organization logic could be also an important aspect of as being the mediator for driving private surplus into commons. And from the system, we, of course, would need probably the strict regulation in zoning preventing extractive practices. But this, again, might not happen before change in societal norms. So here was my info dump. I don't have any more slides. So I think this summary is a good place to end.
Thank you so much. We now have our last speaker, Salvatore. You can soon begin your presentation.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello? Ah, okay. Okay, so thank you so much for the opportunity of speaking at these EXALT Dialogues. Also, thanks a lot to the previous two speakers for their interesting presentation. And thanks to Elsa and Xander for arranging all this. I am Salvatore. I'm from Italy and currently located in Copenhagen, Denmark, where I work at the Center for Applied Ecological Thinking in the University of Copenhagen. My background is anthropology and geography, but last 10 years I've been working mostly within the field of political ecology. So my recent research is focusing more on activist strategies and tactics, especially in the field of climate politics. But my beginnings are have focused on waste management, or rather I should say waste mismanagement. In particular, today I'm going to present a case from Italy. It's actually from the place where I was born. That was also the object of my PhD dissertation. So what I'm going to do, it's and actually it's a trip with you in a very specific historical geography, but that I hope will help me and has draw some more general lesson for issues of land use change, social environmental change, planning, and urbanization. So let's start. As you can see, I used this top word, trash is gold. This is not my expression, but this is actually the expression of a mafia member that in southern Italy was involved in illegal trafficking of toxic waste. And he said this to prosecutors around 1991 when they were questioning him about his business. And they thought he would speak about drugs, but instead he spoke about trash, and they were highly surprised. And that's when Italian prosecutors found out that organized crime had a huge interest into the waste business, 1991. The sentence below, chi ha inquinato deve pagare, instead comes from an activist banner that has been put in front of a waste incinerator in the town of Acerra around 2013, and it means the polluter must pay. And in this presentation, I want to focus precisely on this. So on who's paying when we talk about waste management, waste facilities, landfills, and in general, where do the costs really for managing these unwanted stuff that are created by the urbanization process really end up? So our trip starts in a city under garbage. So this is photographs from Napoli from around 2002. You may know that between 2000 and 2012, the city of Napoli made the global headlines several times because it was basically flooded in its own trash. And already in 1994, the Italian state declared an emergency regime. Because the local authorities could not manage their trash, the government stepped in, created an agency who had special powers to organize the urban waste management. And they basically privatized the entire waste management, gave the contract to a private company who set up an industrial waste cycle to manage the urban waste that encountered, however, the steady opposition of local communities distributed around the rural areas that were the target of landfills and facilities. But these communities were saying, look, our land is already polluted because something else is going on. And this is the second stream of waste. In fact, Campania, the region of Napoli, had been already, since at least the early 90s, the target of a national network to dispose illegal, toxic, hazardous industrial waste. And therefore, local communities opposed new facilities and new contamination on their land. So what I'm interested here, it's how this area, rural urban area between Naples and Caserta has become, through the years, the recipient of so much trash. So I want to understand the processes that lead to the waste occupation of parts of this land. And I want to look to the ways in which waste became actually an object to extract financial and monetary value. The problem, the fact is that this issue also encountered steady opposition, but today I'm not going to focus on the social mobilizations that happened alongside the waste crisis. Rather, I'm going to focus on the waste. This photograph is from an excavation of one of these illegal site of toxic industrial disposal. But for the central Italian government, the toxic waste and the contamination from toxic waste was never really politicized. And the only narrative of the government about the waste crisis was, we have a problem of trash in the street. And actually not trash everywhere, but trash in Napoli, because Napoli is the main city, is under the spotlight. And so the main interest of the central government has been to clean up the city by supporting the government agency with special power to clean it up, to increase the repression of social opposition to new facilities, and to take care only of Italy's international reputation. So my aim with this case is to look through the waste in order to understand how waste came to define the political, economic, and ecological trajectory of the region. To do that, I ask a very simple question. So how is the political economy and the political ecology of waste commodification? So how a waste that becomes an object that is traded, that is sold, that is bought, that is manipulated in order to extract financial value, how has this been how waste has been commodified? And especially I'm interested what the specialization, like the embeddedness into local spaces of this waste, what this does to make possible to a value extraction from the waste itself. So I must specify that when I speak about waste, I'm referring to a socio-technical and ecological object, and we must remember that the pollution and contamination from waste is an eminently political fact because thresholds of pollution are negotiated socially. Of course, there is science, it has a role, but also social pressure for reducing risk from contamination has a crucial role in making waste an object of regulation and of management. And because of all these regulations around waste, it so happens that management and disposal become very expensive things. And this is where the financial value enters the picture. But in order for this financial value to be realized, it needs a land base. And that's basically my argument. So what I'm going to do, I want to interpret the waste commodification as a form of value extraction through basically a shifting of costs. So somebody is paying every time a company is making money out of waste. And this is actually a core dynamic of waste regimes. But if you think about it, it's common to all capitalist production, because what they call externalities of capitalist production, pollution, byproducts, discards, these are all costs that are just put outside the production process, and so they do not influence the profits that can be made through the production itself. Somebody else is going to take care of it. And what I'm arguing is that all strategies to take care of externalities from capitalist production processes, they basically rely on cost shifting, on giving, let pay somebody else. And I show this by looking at precisely the process through which waste management is spatialized. So it's inscribed into a territory. I'm not going to spend much on my theoretical framework because I think more or less we are all on the same page when it comes to issues of the concept of metabolism that also my co-speakers brought up. So I look at this phenomenon of waste commodification from a urban political ecology perspective, and specifically, I use as an explanatory device and as a heuristic the concept of metabolism. In general term, metabolism describes the processes through which all sorts of natural things are mobilized to give flesh and bones, so energy and materials to the urban form. And so to understand the waste flows, manipulation, and value extraction, I look at both the political economic process that make waste a tradable commodity and to the biophysical transformation. So I look at waste also as a material who has an impact on ecological matrices. And in particular, waste is commodified when it is entangled in processes of regulation, valuation, and trade. So that's going to be my focus. But I put together also an emphasis on what I call territorialization processes. And this is a perspective coming from political geography, mostly from the Anglophone world, that is a way to interrogate the creation of system of resource and land control by state and non-state actor, and the way they establish authority or create institution and accrue financial value from bordering specific portion of space and give it to these spaces a certain function within the production, the larger capitalist economy. So I want to see how territories of waste management have been produced in order to understand precisely where does these costs ultimately end. So this is just to give you an idea of the area I'm going to look. I'm going to focus specifically on this vast rural urban area that is around it's around 4,000 square kilometers, but it has a very high population density. About 3.5 million people live here. And this also is the area who has been at the center of most of the conflicts regarding both the urban waste and the toxic waste, because these two flows somehow are parallel, but they also intersect. So my take on the Campania crisis focuses on this actor, the government agency that had the role to set up the urban waste management cycle, the organized crime that has had a crucial role in establishing the conditions through which the disposal of toxic waste could be realized in Campania. But then, of course, there are in the picture, there are also waste entrepreneurs, various businessmen, local landowners who gained from the waste economy, and industry managers looking to get rid of their waste through the network set up by the mafia. In particular, I'm going to look at the making of sites of urban waste management and toxic waste disposal, and what are their socio-ecological implications. So this is a visual representation of the routes of illegal toxic waste disposal from different parts of Italy towards Campania. It has been put together by an environmental NGO that collected evidence from around 80 different police investigations. The temporal temporally, it goes from 1991 to 2013, and it covers around 10 million tons of different kind of hazardous industrial waste. We have sludge from chemical processes, hospital waste, waste from steel factories, and even radioactive waste. So all sorts of waste that are very dangerous and also very expensive to manage. What did the organized crime basically did? They organized through stakeholders who would go to the industry manager and would offer prices to manage their waste that was much lower the actual legal price, but everything on paper would look clean because they had laboratories who would fake analysis, public official who would give authorization. So it was a very structured network that catered to the needs of some of the most important industrial group of Italy. And so by taking their waste and finding a very cheap way to dispose it, this network actually helped increasing the economic viability of Italian capitalism and of this, and also helping these companies making more profit than what they would have done if they had paid for the management of their waste. So, going a little bit deeper, I want to take one example of one mafia family, the Casalesi clan, to basically understand how, I try to understand how did they manage to gain the power over space that allowed them to set up this traffic. So I identified basically three main turning points looking historically. During the 1970s, this clan, this mafia family was just a rural mafia and was not really powerful economically or militarily. However, they started creating companies to participate in the construction sector that during the 70s had basically a boom. And they started their initial primitive accumulation. A second turning point is after the earthquake that hit Campania in 1980, in which the region was flooded with the public money, and the clans of Casalesi was ready to actually benefit from those money because they had the the cement, they had the connections with the political administration to get public works, and they had the machines. So that is when the Casalesi rised from a rural mafia to a proper managerial mafia and increased their power immensely. From where do they took the cement? Well, basically, they started digging quarries that we have in big quantity in Campania. They started making big holes on the ground. And they started also infiltrating the urban waste management. And so what happened is that the power that they accrued, they had through entering the construction boom, was used also to penetrate the waste management boom. And because they had the places where to actually put the trash, the former quarries from which they took the cement to build up their empire, became actually the landfills, zero-cost landfills, where to put the waste. A third turning point, it's at the end of the 1980s, when basically there was a moment, a conjuncture. There was not enough managing capacity for industrial waste in Italy. The prices were really high. So there was a convergence of interest between legal industry owners who needed cheap disposal and the Camorra, the mafia of Campania, of families like Casalesi, who had power over land that they built throughout the urbanization boom and then the post-earthquake reconstruction. So what they did, basically the Camorra family provided the service thanks to the territorial power they had established. And in the end, as I said before, the calculations are a bit hypothetical, but we're talking about of more than 10 million tons of hazardous waste. So that was the toxic waste flow. But what about the urban waste flow? Because the government, when they stepped in to solve the waste crisis, instead of tackling the issue of the illegal toxic waste disposal, they gave huge powers to a private company to basically decide everything about how to manage urban waste. And the company decided that we're gonna pack all the trash in big bags like this, and then we're gonna burn them all into a waste incinerator. But why, would you ask? Burn, keeping the trash and burning? Because in Italy at that time, the burning of trash was subsidized. So the company, for every ton of trash, would make a profit. And this is behind the interest of the company in storing as much garbage as possible to then burn it into the waste incinerator and collect the money from the subsidies. Moreover, the company was given the right basically to decide the planning of the rural areas, because they could decide where to put the landfills, where to put the storage facilities, and where to put the incinerators. So basically, planning was privatized in the name of the emergency and a law derogation. So what happened is that the company went to landowners and asked, can we put the trash here? And of course, they found many people willing to give their land to host trash, because in this way they could get a steady stream of rents. And that's what happened in the area of Giuliano. We have still today standing a huge storage site of basically your packed urban garbage. And I mean, where you see garbage, the company saw actual money. So these are actually, or even the security given to the bank to get the loans to build the facilities was actually the garbage. So the garbage became completely financialized, and of course, in order to get the money, they had to burn it. But because of their technical incapability, they were unable to build the incinerator within time, and so this trash is still standing there today. And it's not the only one, because basically there are at least 16 storage sites that collect almost 6 million tons of waste. These are all places who produce a constant stream of rent. And we also have seen that a lot of farmers decided just to join the waste economy because it was more convenient for them just to host waste. And so this had a huge impact also outside of the contaminated sites or the landfills, because it changed completely the local economy that was based on agriculture, started revolving around the waste management. And this is something we still have to deal with today. So this is a map that synthesizes a little bit what we know. It was done by me together with some activists as a to use in political speeches and trying to mobilize people. So it is a bit it is not like completely correct from a GPS point of view, but it gives an idea of the distribution, and that's where I want to focus the attention. These are all portions of land who have been enclosed, who either through the power of violence of the Camorra or legal framework of the state have been basically subtracted, taken away from the local communities, and they have become ways to extract economic value from waste. Now, where the costs end up. These are two maps that are connected. On the left, this is a map that records the potentially contaminated sites in Campania. And the great majority of these sites are, of course, contaminated by waste. On the right hand, instead, this is a study from 2011 that shows how the most contaminated areas are also the areas where there is a higher incidence and mortality for certain kind of tumors. This map shows the statistical difference for liver cancer. But this is where actually the contaminants in the end up, within the living cells of people. So that's why I talk about waste as a waste commodification as a strategy of cost shifting, because ultimately somebody will have to pay for these contaminants, and the only way for the waste managers, be them the mafia or a legal company, to make money is to have a territory at end where they can pollute without paying for the remediation. So just to wrap up, what does this tell us? So commodification of waste relies on cost shifting. So what makes the capitalist economy viable? It's the fact that it can shift, pass on costs for its production to less politically represented communities. It could be the first to die and to get sick in Campania were the animals, actually. But then it started with the humans. The humans mobilized. We had a movement. But still, this is a process that you can also look at a global scale, with toxic imperialism putting very polluting wastes in the global south from global north countries. But in reality, you can also apply it to carbon. Carbon is an externality that today is increasingly regulated because of science, yes, but also because of the pressure of civil society. So carbon offsetting, it's a way for companies to continue pollute and to shift the cost to somebody else that will absorb the carbon. But we know from research being done that carbon offsetting schemes cause violation of human rights, eviction of people from their ancestral lands, and also ecological damages. So I argue that this dynamic cuts through the entire capitalist economy, and turns the environment, referring to the subsumption and to the real and formal subsumption that the first speaker evoked in Marxist terms. So it really subsumes the environment into the production process, because it becomes a factor. The sinks become totally embedded into the production process, even though it's not acknowledged or recognized. And finally, this is tied to the making of sacrifice zone. So in order to shift these costs, you need a territory who is politically weak, and you need actors who hold power over the land to create the zones where the costs are ultimately shifted. That, of course, from the point of view of the inhabitants, are sacrificed. So, thank you.
Thank you. I want to extend many thanks to all our speakers. I think in summary, we heard amazing speeches and presentations that explained at whose expense these actions of planning and building are done, and whose imagination is actually actualized in planning, and what obstacles we face, and not just and what kind of logic dictates who can continue living and whose dreams are being put into like visible world. We are running a bit short on time, but if any person from the audience has any questions, now is the time for questions. You can just put them in the chat and I will collect some of them. Okay, there's immediately one question to Ville. It says, how does the idea of abstraction relate to the idea of conceptualization? Sometimes I sense that they could be interchangeable, but not entirely. So it would be great to hear Ville's thoughts and reflections on that.
Yeah, I think that's a good question in a way, because we are kind of treading on kind of difficult philosophical terrain in that sense, and probably, well, I haven't thought about it. Probably all kinds of, or conceptualization in general is a form of abstraction in a way. Of course, trying to make sense of the world through language and through kind of categorization in a way. So I think they're related, but I probably don't have like a very, very nice and detailed examination between the relations of those, but just in general, maybe the point that I was trying to kind of drive home is that maybe abstraction in itself is not really something that we can really or need to avoid, but like abstraction plus reification of like treating these kind of models or ideas as kind of concrete things that exist in the world. That's something to look out for, I think. But
yeah, thank you. I encourage people to interact in the chat if possible, and to jump in the middle. I think Ville's presentation
for everyone, if there's no questions.
You interrupted me, sorry. You can go after me, but I was just gonna say that I think Ville's presentation showed how abstraction can be a very distracting tool that doesn't make us appreciate the interconnectedness of different abstractions, even because those abstractions are seen as separate. Yeah, Xander, your turn.
Yeah, no, sorry. I thought you were asking for more questions. But no, I guess for all three of the speakers, I guess I'd say, like, what do you see as being the biggest barriers to actually having, let's say, for a lack of a better term, just like a healthy urbanism or a responsible urbanism? Like, what do you see as, like, what are the biggest barriers kind of towards social change, and like maybe a real social change, not like the one that's kind of being plastered everywhere by NGOs?
Maybe I can start. Well, it's difficult to come up with the final answer to such a challenging question. But I think what connects the three presentation, it's this focus on repoliticizing the flows. So repoliticizing metabolism, meaning the energies and material that contribute to the, to life, to social reproduction, to urbanization. So I think there is still very much a disconnect between different flows. So for example, one of the things that emerged through struggles in the case of Campania is that people understood that they were not fighting waste per se, because waste, it's not a thing that exists in itself. It's always connected to certain framework structures and protocols of production. So actually people understood if they wanted to influence the amount of waste being produced and the kind of waste is being produced, they needed to target the production process. And of course, then it becomes apparent that the only way to change the design of materials and energy, the way they are extracted, manufactured, produced, it's either to do it yourself or to actually muster enough capacity to force the state to regulate. And in the case of Campania, the local organizing managed at least to push the state to provide money for land remediation and to pass new laws that were aimed at standardizing certain practices, certain production of packaging material, so that in the end it will be easier to recycle. And I know it's not really social change, but that's the hard work from mobilizing people with even without previous political experience to revolution. That's where we should ask ourselves, how can we do this?
Yeah, maybe I can answer that question briefly also, and maybe Emil can answer after me. But yeah, like Salvatore said before, that it's probably a very, very big and broad question of like what is the biggest barrier. Maybe I can highlight just one of saying like maybe atomization in society in general might be one that is a big obstacle, a big block to building kind of collective action and movements that could try to kind of so to say maybe repoliticize these kind of flows and take action in these kind of issues. So I don't know, maybe that's one point to highlight, probably, that we are kind of being conquered and divided, so to say, on multiple different fronts in kind of economic, in the sphere of the economy and politics and law and this kind of like, in a way, yeah, I think atomization might be one good point to highlight.
Emil, do you want to say something about this as well?
Yeah, I already almost forgot the question, but really good points from Salvatore and Ville. Well, I don't know, I kind of want to say that basically, like, I feel like my parallel institution network idea is one proposal that was kind of created with this kind of how to make movements stronger materially, even though, like, of course it's quite idealistic approach, but then I've been thinking a lot about this, like, kind of material side of activism or kind of funding activism into a lifestyle. But yeah, and also like this how to kind of well, as an architect, I see that I have a lot of like knowledge that is that I could use to kind of approach, for example, the vicious abstraction, which I already commented into the meeting chat, that the vicious abstraction also contributes to the problem that for example, urban design documents are often perceived as fundamental rationalist plans and not political documents, which they are proposals, and they are not fixed in stone, but they seem like it from the local perspective, of course, and usually they are followed through because it's hard to say anything, and sometimes like the procedures are also sometimes really hard to approach, and sometimes the documents are also published strategically to avoid complaints. And this is actually like something that I learned in architecture school. So it's yeah, I'm not sure what else to say. That yeah, how to raise political action and make it somehow more permanent or sustainable in itself, or like a permanent change in norms and values.
Can I add something very fast to this point? Because in terms of barriers, and also connecting to what Emel was saying, I think that one of the main barrier, besides the process of production and the fact that is out of reach from the citizens and even the workers themselves, the biggest barrier that I see is the fact that the local communities do not have power over their territory or the land that nurtures them or where they live. So the fact, especially in Europe, where common institutions have been completely destroyed. So you have individual landowners who could join the waste economy and pollute everybody just to make themselves money. So we lack ways through which local communities can actually have a say, but also practically control which kind of developments happen on their lands. And this precisely one of the strategy that the local movements in Campania used to prevent the waste occupation was to do a counter occupation. So they started buying collectively pieces of land to establish local farms. They created a network of social cooperatives. And in interviews, activists will tell me, this is a dam. We need to put a dam against further exploitation of land.
Yes, and I actually have a short adding point or an example from Northern Karelia. I mentioned the snow change cooperation that creates nature restoration through traditional livelihoods, and they have been starting to kind of buy land. Like they are using this kind of cooperative business to buy land for the uses of natural restoration and for kind of funding their values through this local traditional livelihoods like fishing and stuff like that. They just bought this old school from this shrinking municipality of Tohmajärvi to use as a production facility. And I think that is somewhat similar to that, even though of course it also needs that kind of values behind it, like how to really embed them into that kind of third sector private-ish action, activist organization. I think it's really weird in this private public third sector organization, where does those go? But yeah, just adding this point.
One person from the chat is thanking people for opening this space, and they want to congratulate the speakers. The sacrificed territories that Salvatore talked about are part of a very important debate nowadays. In Bolivia, migration of rural to urban areas is an important variable, which is part of the problem, creating pollution heavens into a vicious circle where economic, social, political, and ecological variables interact, unfortunately not in a positive way. I have one final question, but it's the time already. I will still say it, so maybe we can have another conversation at some point. But I'm really curious to how this all can be related to circular economy and the concept and idea of circular economy that is pretty much super depoliticized and very popular these days and championed by different actors as a solution. However, we don't have time to engage with the concept today because it's the time when we decided to officially end this event. So, Xander, do you have any final closing remarks?
No, I'd just like to say thank you so much, Elsa, for organizing this. Emel, Ville, Salvatore, for kind of coming out and speaking and sharing your work with us. And yeah, and I'm really grateful for the EXALT network for kind of also supporting this space, and especially Lina for kind of managing a lot of this. And yeah, and everyone else behind the EXALT initiative to make it possible. And just kind of for a heads up, so we've got some, I'm not sure what order they're coming, but we've got hopefully something related. This isn't the title, on hydrological extractivism and hydrosocial relations coming up. And also a panel specifically dedicated to lithium mining and talking about the kind of issue of lithium. And we'll have more coming. And yeah, please everyone share, and hopefully more people come and kind of get something out of these EXALT dialogues. And again, thanks everyone for coming. And Elsa, you're great.
Thank you.
Thank you,
And this will
everyone.
be on YouTube, so stay tuned. If you missed something, you'll get to see it again.
Bye everyone. Ciao.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.